From WABE in Atlanta, this is Savory Stories, a show where we take a look at Atlanta's people through its food history and cuisine.
On this podcast, we trace Atlanta's food story from the past to the present, getting to know Atlanta's culinary creators and demystifying stereotypes about food.
I'm Chef Asita Reed, owner of Life Chef, where we help you live the life you love, and author of How to Feed a Kid, a Parent's Guide.
And I'm Akila McConnell, culinary historian and author of A Culinary History of Atlanta and owner of Unexpected Atlanta Tours and Stories, where we introduce locals and visitors to Atlanta's stories, foods, and neighborhoods. And today on Savory Stories, we're exploring a cuisine I feel very connected to, and that is Indian food. My connection to Atlanta's Indian food is deep because I'm of Indian descent. My parents immigrated to the United States in 1978 from South India, and I was born a year later in Philadelphia. Now, in the early 1980s, we lived in New Jersey, which was the hub of the United States Indian immigrant population. In New Jersey, there were tons of Indian grocers, restaurants, sari shops, cultural centers, but my parents hated the dreary cold of the Northeast. They missed warmer weather, and so when I was 10 years old, in 1989, we moved to Auburn, Alabama. Let me tell you, Asta, this was culture shock.
That's a big move.
It was a big move. I was not happy about it, I will tell you. So we had been surrounded in New Jersey by this large Indian American population to Alabama and Atlanta, where there was really hardly anything Indian to be found. And so today, when I talk about Atlanta's Indian food scene, it's one that I've personally seen evolve from the ground up.
Wow, that's got to be tough as a kid. But let's go back in time as you do so well. Let's talk about the roots of the Indian food scene here in Atlanta.
So the Indian food scene in the early 1990s was practically non-existent here in Atlanta. Food is an incredibly important part of Indian culture. There is just no gathering without food. And the foods that we eat are surprisingly simple to make, but layered with spice. Spice is at the base of our meals, and it wasn't always easy to get things in Atlanta like cilantro, coriander, mustard seeds, or turmeric. I'll tell you this, Asita, and my story is very similar to many other Indian Americans who I know from that time period. When my family used to go to India every 4 years or so to visit family members, we would literally bring a ginormous empty suitcase with us, fill the empty suitcase with uruga, or spicy pickles, and appalams, what in North India are known as papads. My mom would pack as much food as she could from India because there was just so little that we could get here in the South at the time. The one haven that we had was your DeKalb Farmers Market.
Yes, that magical place. It is so special and a long-standing haven for many immigrant families.
Yeah, I have talked to so many Indian immigrants who considered YDFM as an oasis in the late 1980s and early 1990s. At YDFM, we couldn't get all the Indian groceries that we needed, but we could get freshly picked vendica or okra, tiny purple eggplants, pushnika, or yellow pumpkin, fresh sugar cane, and so many other foods that my grandmother and my mother used in their cooking. There was only one other store, Cherry's, that opened in 1983, just about a mile away from YDFM. Now, Cherry's, it couldn't have been more than 400 square feet when we used to go there, but it was the only place in the city where we could go and get our masalas, our roti flour, and jasmine and basmati rice. Throughout my entire childhood, we used to drive once per month the 2 hours from Alabama to Atlanta to shop at YDFM and Cherry's. And I know many other Indian American families who have said that they drove as far away as from Florida or from Nashville to come to Atlanta to do their monthly shopping.
Wow. Let's give the Cherry's some shine. Wasn't that store started by a couple of brothers?
Yeah, they are so lovely, George and John. And I'll tell you, back in the day, they used to let us borrow Tamil movies, which is the language my family speaks, on VHS tapes that my grandparents loved to watch. And we would come and bring it back a full month later when we came back to Atlanta to load up on groceries.
That's awesome.
It used to be a game that my brother and I played. How many grocery carts would we need to stock up on food for the month? Usually we'd fill at least 3 grocery carts, and my dad would have to tie the giant bags of rice and dal to the roof of our minivan.
That's an image.
And I want to give a shout out to contributor Anila Yoganathan and the Decatur-ish website for putting together an amazing 4-part series recently on Decatur's South Asian grocers and restaurants, including Cherion's, Patel Plaza, and Zyka. I've put those links in the show notes and highly recommend those articles.
Patel Plaza has grown into its own destination. Decatur's lucky to have so much good food in one place. The mutton biryani at Bawarchi Biryanis is one of the best things I've ever put in my mouth. And if I had to pick the best chicken 65 in ATL, I'm putting my money here as well. It is so crispy and delicious. And when you squeeze that fresh lime over the chicken and get a little bit of onion, it's like heaven in a bite. Once we caught them at shift change and we had to wait a few minutes for our food, and the chicken 65 was probably rushed because it wasn't as crisp as usual, but it was still delicious. So, of course, we ate it. And when our waitress came and checked on us, we just kind of mentioned it, not really complaining like, hey, chicken 65 is not crispy like it usually is. She insisted that the kitchen remake it. Now, meanwhile, Akila, we've got a table just covered in food. I'm talking dosa, biryani, butter chicken, naan. Like, there's no room for anything. And so we're like, no, it's fine. We're so good. Of course, she had them remake it anyway. And it came out as perfect as ever. So nothing but good vibes at Bawarchi Biryanis.
And a full plate, that's just the way we do things, full table.
Full table.
So after the break, we will break down the history of Indian cuisine and how culture and geography influence many of the restaurants you just heard about. One of the very important things to know about Indian cuisine is that it is not a single monolithic entity. Prior to colonization, India was a number of disconnected kingdoms, and each kingdom had its own language and food. And by own language, I truly mean its own language, in the way that Italian is completely different from Spanish. There are 121 languages in India and something like 19,000 dialects.
That's a lot of languages.
It is. And likewise, the foods of each region are completely different as well. Now, my family is from Tamil Nadu in the extreme south of the country, and we speak Tamil. And our cuisine is largely rice-based because rice grows a lot in Tamil Nadu. Our most common breads are ones that you mentioned, dosas, as well as idlis, which are both made from rice flour. Now, on the other hand, people from Punjab, which is in North India, they speak Punjabi, a language I can't understand at all, and they tend to make wheat-based breads like naan. A lot of the typical foods that you find at Indian restaurants, like tandoori chicken or naan, are Punjabi foods or North Indian foods. But there are restaurants in the city where you can find other regional specialties, like Madras Mantra that specializes in South Indian cuisine, like dosas and idlis, and Chinese dhaba, which serves Indo-Chinese cuisine, like gobi Manchurian or Chinese bale, found commonly in Kolkata and West Bengal.
I would say I'm most familiar with Northern cuisine. One of my family's favorite places on earth is Bombay Cafe on North Druid Hills. And while I typically give lunch buffets a wide berth, that's exactly what lured me here. And what's kept us coming back for nearly a decade is the consistency, quality, and friendliness. I stand on their saag paneer. It's my absolute favorite. This family-owned business also has a gorgeous banquet space and a generous patio, so they host a lot of special events, and they cater. Funny story, my last meal before I had my daughter was at Bombay Cafe. I was about to be induced. Doctor's like, go get some food because you know where this is going.
And spicy food, right?
Mm-hmm. I tried to get as full as possible, which is really hard when you're 9 months pregnant because you don't have any room. But you know how it is. Once you get into the hospital for delivery, food gets scarce. Let's get back to the history here. There are so many Indian restaurants these days that it's clear that Atlanta loves the varied flavors of India. So what shifted?
Yeah, so I'd say in the early 1990s, there was just very little movement in the Indian-owned businesses. And then the Centennial Olympics came to Atlanta, rapidly increasing the city's international profile, as well as bringing in thousands of immigrants to work in the city's businesses. Now, I want to straight up mention there had always been a few Indian restaurants in the city. The oldest of these was Calcutta, which opened in Brookhaven in 1973, and then Touch of India in Midtown that opened in the 80s. But the Centennial Olympics created a proliferation of new Indian restaurants like Zaika and Chatpati, two longstanding restaurants that you can still enjoy, and I certainly do today.
Definitely. Those are two winners. And that's a great shout out to the city's OGs and some of the street food infusion that's coming out of restaurants like Masti and Tokal Hills, where I always get the pani puri and the wings, and the very popular Botiwala in Pont City Market, where you have to try the Kerala fried chicken. Oh, it doesn't make sense how good that chicken is. Like, really? This is chicken? Botiwala and Chai Pani in downtown Decatur are both owned by chef Meherwan Irani, who opened up a spice shop in Pont City Market called Spicewala. Chef Irani grew up in India, where the nuance of spices are like speaking a second language, just like you told us, Akila. And he wanted to share the power of these high-quality spices and knew that people kind of had a hard time knowing what's what. So now you can purchase single spices and blends from Spicewala that have been sourced, curated, and produced by Irani himself.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I know you mentioned the Kerala fried chicken. My absolute favorite at Chai Pani is the crispy okra fries.
Oh, yes.
Perfect starter dish. If you've never tried Indian food, you can go and eat that and you will love it. It's just basically like super addictive.
For anyone who's just like, oh, I don't like okra, recant that tale immediately.
Yes, you will like it. You will like it there. And it feels like a very long way from the early 1990s to the present day. Now, today, Atlanta has the second fastest growing Indian immigrant and Indian American population in the country.
Wow.
With over 140,000 people of Indian descent living in the metro Atlanta area. That's even more than Philly, where I was born. Not only do we have over 9 Hindu temples in the city, we have dozens of Indian grocery stores and more Indian restaurants than, frankly, you can count, centered in hubs in Decatur, Cumming, Sewanee, and Johns Creek. Forsyth County even is home to a 60-acre cricket field. And Indians make up about a third of the city's Asian population. But the growth has been very organic and very much fueled by entrepreneurs like the Cherians, who made this a welcoming place to get all of these foods that we love.
Speaking of entrepreneurs, let's talk about Asha Gomez. She bridges the flavor and flair of Kerala and South India, where she's from, and the South, that is Georgia, where she currently resides in her award-winning first cookbook, My Two Souths. She formerly owned the restaurant Cardamom Hill, which closed despite rave reviews and loyal patrons, so she could spend more time being a mom. I love that. Then she opened Third Space, where she held fabulous dinners and ran an event space that was truly gorgeous. Now she's hosting teas and more at Tulip and Tea in Conyers and doing whatever the heck she wants, honestly, which I love for her.
And I got to tell you, I am hoping she brings back her Indian spiced carrot cake. Did you ever have that? Oh my gosh.
It's legendary.
She basically infused masala spices into carrot cake and so good.
Yes. I encourage our listeners to follow her on social media because not only is she smart and witty, but she is a glorious hostess and you want to be at her events. As a woman and entrepreneur myself, watching her evolution as a business owner, a mother, an author, a lifestyle influencer has really been inspirational. And her second book, I Cook in Color, really shows just how beautiful the influence of Indian cuisine can be on food.
It is a beautiful food, but it's also, honestly, very, very simple. I think often people tell me, oh, Indian food, it's so complicated. But it's not, really. It's ultimately based around the concept of a balanced diet. At the center of every Indian meal across the subcontinent is a grain, usually rice in the south and wheat in the north. Then that will be supplemented with a protein. It might be chicken or goat or lamb for non-vegetarians, or fish or seafood for coastal Indian populations, and then lentils for vegetarians. And then you'll have a variety of vegetables that will be cooked with masalas or spices. The concept is that every meal you eat has an essential balance of protein, grain, and vegetables.
And variety and layers of flavor that just taste like love on a plate.
You're right. And, that's one of the reasons why if you are new to Indian cuisine, or maybe you don't exactly know what you want to order, two great suggestions. First off, go to an Indian restaurant and order a thali. Thali, Thali. It is a mixed plate of food where they're going to bring you about 6 or 7 different type of dishes. It's exactly what you would get if you went to an Indian home and ate. And there's always going to be something you're going to like. The other option is, of course, lunch buffets. And we are so lucky in the city to have some incredible ones. My family personally loves Madras Mantra. If you go on the weekends, it is slammed with people. And that means that the food is very fresh. There's constantly new dishes coming out, so you can be guaranteed to try something you enjoy. By the way, if you're wondering why in Indian restaurants, everything is usually served in stainless steel dishes.
Yeah, why is that?
Yeah, so it's because so much of Indian cuisine uses turmeric. Turmeric leaves really nasty yellow stains on both glass and plastic, but it doesn't leave any marks on stainless steel. And if you really get into Indian food, you can find tons of stainless steel plates, bowls, and cooking utensils that you can purchase at Cherian's and Patel Brothers.
I think I'm going to start working on my gift list from there. One of the things that really strikes me, Akila, is the hospitality at Indian restaurants. I have felt so welcomed and cared for at many of the places that we've dined. And that, as much as delicious food, is part of what keeps me coming back for more. When people inquire, how's the family doing? Because they remember us, or they don't have a problem if the kids spill their water, little stuff like that. In fact, most Indian restaurants I've visited, even if they look gorgeous and fancy, are very family friendly. And in this era where everyone is busy and customer service seems to be a thing of the past, it's refreshing to be able to build relationships with the owners, the waiters, and staff. And even if you're not familiar with the cuisines of India, I'm sure you'll feel right at home, because to me, Indian food is like the ultimate comfort food.
Yeah, and Indians, we are very, in general, family-friendly people. I can't imagine a place where kids are excluded. I have 2 little kids, and we take them to all the restaurants in the city, and they're welcomed. And they make sure that the food has the flavors, but they'll tone down spices, perhaps, for kids. Another thing about inclusivity is that Indian food is a great way to tackle people with many different food restrictions. India has the world's largest vegetarian population, with approximately 276 million people practicing vegetarianism. And many Indian Americans are vegetarians as well. Because of that, all Indian food includes a substantial amount of lentils, or what we describe as dals, to provide protein. Now, veganism is less frequently practiced, but there are usually plenty of vegan dishes, and it's usually relatively easy to find options at Indian restaurants because so many rice dishes are naturally gluten-free. There will be vegetarian dishes, vegan dishes, as well as nut-free dishes.
I work with folks who are on a weight loss journey, and they often complain about eating, diet food and how unappealing it is. I respond with, just go to an Indian restaurant and order lots of veggies. The flavors, the aromas, and the pairings of vegetables with legume and bean-based dishes all help to provide satisfaction. And feeling nourished really is part of the journey. And that's not even touching upon the Ayurvedic properties that can be found in many Indian dishes. This cuisine really is my husband's favorite. He will tell you, no hands down, and it just watching the eyes roll back in his head every time we go to an Indian restaurant, like he's never been there before. And it's definitely in my top 2. For me, it's the complexity of flavors. But I think home cooks might find that intimidating. What do you think, Akila?
Well, I already told you, Indian food is simple. And if you feel overwhelmed when you go into an Indian store like Patel Plaza or Cherian's, or even by the thought of cooking Indian food, I suggest that you start simply. Here's all you need to buy. $7 commitment. That's it. You go into Cherian's or into Patel Plaza and you buy a small bag of garam masala. Masala just means mix, and garam means spice. So this is literally spice masala. That's it. And it's a mix of different flavors mixed together. And then it's also nice to have some coriander powder. You don't need it because it will be included in the garam masala. Fresh ginger. Always fresh ginger. Don't use ginger powder. That stuff I don't even know what's in that, and fresh cilantro, and maybe a bag of frozen parota or a frozen naan. That's it. $7 commitment, and you'll be able to make many meals. Because the other thing that is great is Indian food is relatively inexpensive to prepare. You're probably going to have everything else that you need in your own kitchen already.
Okay, so what's an easy dish for people to start cooking at home?
Yeah, so learn how to make one thing really well. And in my opinion, the very easiest thing to learn how to make is Channa Masala or chickpea masala. And this is a dish that you find in every Indian restaurant. It's probably the most popular Indian dish. Definitely the first Indian dish that my husband learned to love. It's something I whipped together in my own kitchen in 20 minutes, something I started learning how to make when I was 18. So everybody can do this, okay? So here's what you do. You just dice up 1 large tomato, a quarter onion, a ½ inch of chopped ginger, and a garlic clove. You're going to saute the onion, garlic, and ginger so that they get nice and fragrant. And then you're going to add in your chopped tomato and saute for another few minutes. Then you're going to either use an immersion blender or a food processor and process this tomato mixture until it's very smooth.
I've seen a lot of Indian cooks, because I watch all these cooking videos. I've seen a lot of Indian cooks use blender or food processor for recipes. And actually, that's how I make the curry for my butter chicken.
Yeah, it's actually the identical base. This base that I'm talking about, the combo of garlic, tomatoes, onions, and ginger, it's used in so many North Indian dishes, including matar paneer, malai kofta, butter chicken, as well as Channa Masala. Super easy to make. So what you do is you take that base and in the same pot that you were using, heat up about a tablespoon of vegetable oil, add your tomato mixture back into the oil, and then you want to season it. So you're going to season it with about a ½ tablespoon of garam masala, salt, coriander powder, and then chili powder to taste.
Okay, speaking of chili powder, let's talk about spice. Even though Indian cuisine may use a lot of spices, as in seasoning, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily spicy.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think this is a huge misconception. When we're talking about breaking apart myths, Indian food can be spicy, but it doesn't have to be. You can make it less spicy and still retain all the flavor. Frankly, in my house, we don't make things super spicy. And most Indian home cooks I know use a lot less spice than restaurants use. The reason why is that the spicier you add it, the more salt you have to add in as well to counterbalance the spiciness. And, well, everybody's on a health kick nowadays. So less spice means a little bit less salt as well.
Okay, let's get back to this Channa Masala.
Yeah, so you've seasoned your base. You're going to just add in a can of drained chickpeas. You're going to let it simmer on the stove for about 10 minutes. Stir it occasionally. Everything's just going to come together. You're going to taste it. Make sure it doesn't need any more salt. And that's it. You're going to garnish it with a bit of finely chopped cilantro. Buy some frozen parata. I like the Kawan brand personally. Or you can have a frozen naan and heat it up just on a pan. Super easy, perfect weeknight meal when it is cold outside.
Sounds like I'm coming to your house for dinner soon, Akila.
I would love that. And I would also love to see if any of you make this recipe. Please shout out on social media at UnexpectedATL. And I can't wait to hear about your Indian cooking journey.
We'll be sure to post the recipe as well in the show notes.
Thank you all so much for joining Savory Stories. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you do that kind of thing with your favorite podcasts. Savory Stories is produced by Crystal Devone and Kevin Rinker, with additional production and editing from Scotty Crow. The series was created by Summer Evans and premiered on City Lights with Lois Reitzes. For more, visit wabe.org/savory stories.